Well, thank you for having me here today. I appreciate you guys coming. I know it's late in the evening, so I'll try not to bore you too much. My name is Tate. I'm the founder of the DigiByte Blockchain. Just to give you a little background on my story and how I ended up, I guess, in the blockchain space. It actually goes back to kind of where I grew up. I'm actually from a really small town in the middle of nowhere in Idaho. In fact, my hometown is so remote, it was the first place that the US government tested the first nuclear reactor in 1956. So my hometown is actually the first place in the world to be lit by nuclear energy. To this day, it still only has like 800 people in it. So I guess that's kind of our claim to fame. But since it was such a remote area, my dad ended up having an accident, broke his neck, both of his arms, and I moved back home to take care of him. Well, during that process, I discovered Bitcoin. So out of something tragic came something I think amazing. So when I discovered Bitcoin in 2012, I started going through the source code. I had a background being a software developer, building websites. Basically since around 2003 when I was in high school, and I really was blown away with what the blockchain was. To me, it was the most fascinating thing I've ever discovered. And how I like to explain, blockchain technology to people that, really don't understand it. The easiest comparison I can make is if you imagine all around us in nature, like for instance, if you take our own DNA, that is very similar to how a blockchain works, right? DNA replicates itself, it's spread out, and it continues in a decentralized fashion. Same with, like, for instance, the spores from a mushroom. Throughout nature, identical copies of life are spread in a decentralized fashion. And to me, that's very, I guess, symbiotic with how I view a blockchain. So, discovering Bitcoin, I started going through the source code, and I just want to start out by saying, to this day, I'm still a huge fan of Bitcoin. I don't think any one particular blockchain is ever going to replace Bitcoin. I don't want it to. I believe there should be multiple blockchains out there. So I just kind of wanted to clarify that out there. But as a developer, going through the Bitcoin software, I started realizing that there were some issues. And starting out in 2012, I was a miner. And as a miner, when the first ASICs came out, basically overnight, it was almost pointless for me with a few GPUs to keep mining Bitcoin in 2012. In 2012 into 2013. So in the fall of 2013, I started coming up with some ideas I thought might be one day used to enhance the Bitcoin protocol. But to actually just merge any change you want, as most of you know, to the Bitcoin core protocol is almost impossible. So literally from my garage in Idaho, I was like, well, maybe I'll just throw another blockchain out there as an experiment and see what people think. So from about, October, November of 2013 until the release on January 10th, 2014, I prototyped and came up with the first version of the DigiByte protocol. And so the day that DigiByte launched, I used the headline, USA Today, target data stolen from up to 110 million customers' data. Because at the time, and even to this day, my view was blockchain technology can be used for cybersecurity applications. That to me, I feel like that's the first, the ultimate home run for blockchain technology. So over the past 4.5 years, DigiByte has underwent a series of improvements, and oftentimes we've been the first in a lot of these changes. So in 2014, we came up with something that's known as DigiShield, which, kind of to start off, how many people in here, I know this is MIT, so I know this is probably a more technical crowd. How many people in here know what the difficulty adjustment is within the Bitcoin software? By a show of hands. Okay, so let me just kind of go over it. So Bitcoin is set to have a block time of about 10 minutes, right? Well, how do you make sure that new blocks are discovered every 10 minutes? You have a very complicated math problem known as the difficulty that adjusts to make sure that miners don't find blocks faster than 10 minutes or slower than 10 minutes. Well, the problem with the way that was originally implemented in Bitcoin is that can be gamed. And what we found with DigiByte in 2014 and with Dogecoin and several other blockchains is when you take a 5 to 10 fold increase in hashing power or mining power, and you throw that at a blockchain that's using the Bitcoin difficulty adjustment system. So if you took Bitcoin as it stands today and you threw 10 to 15 times the mining power at it, you would start finding dozens of blocks, every minute or so. So it would dramatically speed up the block time. Now what happens when that hash rate switches off? Well, the blockchain freezes, and that's a huge problem. And if there's a talk, if you want to know more about that, I gave at the Texas Bitcoin conference where I called it the Chinese mining kill switch. That could effectively freeze the Bitcoin blockchain for months. And to this day, that's what I tell people is the most significant flaw within Bitcoin, is the fact it takes 2 weeks to adjust the targeted difficulty. With DigiByte, we launched with a 2-hour retarget. These multi-pools would go and they would hit us. They would switch from Litecoin to DigiByte to Dogecoin. And when they would leave our blockchain, even with a 2-hour retarget, with the way the code's currently written in Bitcoin, because we had the same difficulty adjustment at the time when we launched, it could take us upwards of a half a day between blocks when we would have a 10 to 15 fold decrease in hash power. In fact, it affected Dogecoin so poorly, their blockchain actually froze for 3 days. And then I helped the Dogecoin developers in early 2014 actually implement DigiShield, which is essentially real-time difficulty adjustment, meaning every single block, the difficulty adjusts based upon the previous blocks. So without a doubt, that is the most significant long-term vulnerability I know of today within Bitcoin, and it needs to be fixed. But yet nobody's really talking about it. Yet the technology has been adapted. So DigiShield, like I said, we developed, has now been implemented in everything from Zcash to Bitcoin Cash to dozens of other blockchains. And in fact, when the Bcash split this summer, I was on Twitter saying, I don't know what everybody's waiting for. It's going to take hours or days, and it's going to take weeks for the blockchain to stabilize. Because you had, in the case of the Bcash split, where 80% of the hash rate dropped. And that's exactly what happened. So it's still a big problem, but almost every other blockchain has fixed that. So that was one of the things we pioneered. Next thing we did was our multi-algo hard fork. So in the fall of 2014, we actually split from 1 mining algorithm to 5. So how that works is DigiByte actually has 5 independent, unique mining algorithms. And so 2 of them are now mined with ASIC script and SHA-256. 2 of them are still GPU friendly, and 1 of them is designed for CPU miners, but that has been overtaken by some botnet miners, so that's not exactly the thing, so we're planning a hard fork to fix that. But the real gist of that technology is you can take all the Bitcoin mining power in the world, throw it at DigiByte, and you can only mine 20% of the blocks. Combine that with real-time difficulty adjustment, it's a much more secure platform. So continuing on, when DigiByte originally launched, we had like a minute block time. We've now got that down to 15 seconds. But the unique thing is each algorithm is actually a minute and 30 seconds, and then that averages out to 15 seconds. So, and then also DigiByte in 2017, last year, we actually were the first major altcoin to activate SegWit via a software. So we did it before Litecoin and Bitcoin and others. So that's kind of a brief snapshot. I will go into more specific parts on a more technical level, and then kind of end with kind of a general overview of just kind of my experience being a developer and being in the space for 6 years. So what we like to say is DigiByte is more secure, has faster transactions, and is forward-thinking blockchain technology. So what do we really mean by that? Well, since last April, we've set up, and there's been over 200,000 full nodes distributed on the DigiByte blockchain worldwide. And as I just explained, the 5 algorithms and the advanced difficulty stability give it a more rigid, robust platform. What makes us forward thinking? We're not necessarily aiming DigiByte to be in the payment sector. For us, it's about cybersecurity and securing devices, setting up a secure platform that other platforms and applications can be built upon. And I'll get more into that later. And we think the home run for blockchain technology is combining AI with blockchain with IoT. So as I just mentioned, we have 15-second blocks, and we have the UTXO protocol set is a little bit more rigid, which I'll get into that in a couple slides. So where do we see DigiByte fitting into the current blockchain landscape? The way I like to describe this is if you imagine a tree that grows and kind of branches out, that's kind of what is happening in the blockchain space, right? So Bitcoin was the beginning of that solid trunk. So, Bitcoin is almost a decade old, will be next year. And DigiByte shares a lot of similarities. Some of the improvements that are merged into Bitcoin Core, we merge into DigiByte. But yet we have our unique differences, such as, like I explained, the block speed, block time, difficulty, etc. And Litecoin is similar to Bitcoin, Dogecoin, but then you start having these branches into these different sort of approaches to blockchain technology. So that's kind of how we see where the industry is at today. Even this was made in December, and obviously I'm sure we could update it now. That's just how fast and rapid this space is emerging. And all this stuff that you're seeing, this is on digibyte.io if you want to go check it out. So how does DigiByte compare to some of the other established blockchains? Well, currently DigiByte can handle about 560 transactions per second. That's because of our block speed. We have some code to double that every 2 years, so we can rapidly adopt it. With the 5 mining algos and the real-time difficulty adjustment and the fact that our average transaction fee and cost is less than a fraction of a penny, we have a much more scalable platform. And in fact, you could put all 3, Litecoin, Bitcoin, and Bitcoin Cash, and we could more than double the capacity in terms of pure scalability. So going back to the mining, as I explained, DigiByte has 5 unique mining algorithms. That leads to a lot of unique benefits that you don't have with blockchains that only have a single mining algorithm. As I stated, you could take all the Bitcoin mining power in the world, throw it at DigiByte, you only get 20% of the blocks. But more importantly, when we go to make changes to the protocol, like we're planning a hard fork later this year, where we change out a mining algorithm, we only require that 70% of the miners agree. So if there's a rogue algorithm that's been completely overtaken by an ASIC army, we have the ability, we can replace it. We can also update the platform and do some other neat things. And also, we can actually get much faster block times, and we're exploring and testing some ways to get the block times down to just a few seconds, and that's not necessarily possible with a single mining algorithm. Because what happens is there was research done by Microsoft that showed with Bitcoin that the average block, it took about 13, 15 seconds before 95% of the nodes on the network actually received that block. Well, with DigiByte, each individual algorithm right now has a block timing of 1 minute 30 seconds. So you have more playtime. So if we reduce the 1 minute 30 seconds down to, let's say a minute, we can start approaching a block speed of 7 to 8 seconds, but you still have each individual algorithm giving it more time, because the argument against getting blocks too fast is that mining pools would have advantages because they would be able to propagate blocks faster. Well, with multi-algo, you can somewhat mitigate that problem. So you not only mitigate the centralization issue of mining, but you can also get faster, more secure block times as you go, and you keep mining decentralized. So how was the reward chosen for DigiByte? Well, the idea is a 1 to 1,000 ratio. 21 million Bitcoin, 21 billion DigiBytes in 21 years. So what happens is every month there's a 1% reduction, and the last DigiBytes will be mined in the year 2035. So how do I like to describe DigiByte in terms of how to build upon it, and in UTXO protocols in general? And when I say UTXO, what I'm really referring to is that tree and that trunk. Bitcoin, Litecoin, DigiByte, Bitcoin. Those are UTXO style blockchains. Then you also have the virtual machine type, which is Ethereum. But with the UTXO type blockchains, you have a much more rigid structure that I believe offers superior cybersecurity capability for applications to build into. So if you imagine a cake or a pie with 3 layers, at the base, a blockchain like Bitcoin or DigiByte is effectively a very advanced communications protocol, and you can do a lot of innovative things with that. In the middle, you have that digital asset layer, where, where DigiBytes or Bitcoin comes in, and that is what incentivizes people to even run the software in the first place. So that's important because you start getting a lot of these approaches where people are going to make, oh, I'm going to make a private blockchain. Well, how are you going to secure it? You need that proof of work, you need that digital asset, you need that incentive. And then on top of that, once you have those pieces, you can start building and scaling out applications in a number of ways. So we've been in the process of building various applications over the last 4 years. One of the more interesting ones, I personally have been involved with was something we call DigiSign. It's basically, if you're familiar with DocuSign, just imagine that combined with the blockchain. This platform has currently already been released. It's securing goods that are being transmitted from China to the United States. And it has everything from blockchain identity to the actual records are hashed and then put in the blockchain and secured that way. So there's several innovative ones that I know are being built currently, and this will continue going. And that's also part of the reason I'm here, is to help people that are interested in building applications on top of a blockchain that want to be able to scale. We're very much interested in welcoming people to start doing that on top of DigiByte. Because what's possible, with the fact that we have much more scalability than, say Bitcoin or Litecoin, is we have the ability to do much more. So when you transmit a DigiByte, there's a lot of different things you can do with that transaction. And what do I really mean by that? It all comes down to actually the public and private keys that are created in a wallet. So how many people in here know what a Merkle data tree is? Okay, so a Merkle data tree is the data structure that you find that underlines pretty much every blockchain out there, right? And that's kind of the innovation. It was created by a guy named Ralph Merkle, who also created public and private key cryptography in 1969 for a Stanford thesis. And as soon as he did that, the government came in, classified his work, and then that basically became the basis for all top secret communications with the US government that we still know today. And the basis for PKI infrastructure, for the internet as we know it, with what they call root certificate authorities. Well, he himself said there's one problem that he hasn't been able to solve, and that is how do you distribute those public and private keys in a trustless fashion across the globe? And there's an interview he gave on YouTube. It's a great interview. I don't think many people have watched it, but he said blockchain solves that problem. The problem he's been trying to solve for 30 years, which is, if I'm here and I'm trying to communicate with one of you guys across the world, we have to meet first to exchange these keys. Well, a blockchain by default distributes that. And the way the internet is architected itself to this day, when you buy a Mac or when you buy a Microsoft laptop, it comes pre-installed with these root certificate authorities, which essentially are no different than the keys that are held in your Bitcoin wallet or your DigiByte wallet or your Ethereum wallet. So instead of an architecture where there's only a handful of centralized root certificate authorities, if we took all the IoT devices, all the different things, and issued them blockchain-based public and private keys, we could fix 90%, 95% of the cybersecurity vulnerabilities in the internet today. So applications that take that aspect of blockchain, which is completely underutilized, and this can be done with DigiByte, this can be done with Bitcoin, this can be done with Litecoin, this could even be done with Ethereum, you have the ability to scale almost infinitely, because once you establish those keys, you can use those keys to sign whatever you want, authenticate whatever you want, and to me, that is the most exciting aspect of this technology. So I think if you take anything away from that, or anything away from what I'm saying tonight, just look into that. Remember that. I mean, I know everybody's excited about financial transactions and tokenizing everything, but to me, the long-term play for this technology that's going to impact our everyday lives is going to be in the cybersecurity realm with the distribution of essentially wallet keys. So just a summary, the technical specifications, we were launched on January 10th, 2014. It's a UTXO multi-algorithm, 5 mining algorithms. I think there's currently about 11 billion in circulation, but the year 2035 will be when the last DigiBytes are minted. So how, if you want to get involved with the community, the other thing I should note, DigiByte was never an ICO. DigiByte is basically been run by volunteer contributions, private donations, and it's been completely open source since the beginning in 2014. So we've also just set up a DigiByte Foundation. To date, you know, we hit a market cap in January of 1.7 billion, but our foundation to date has about $20,000 in it. So it literally is a volunteer, you know, basis. So you know, we're working on some things to change that, to fix that, but in terms of a grassroots, community-driven blockchain, I besides Bitcoin, you know, I can't think of any other one out there that has the community that we do. In fact, the main place that we have most of our interactions are now on Telegram, but there's something that I like to call, and I would, you know, offer everybody here to take the DigiByte challenge, which is simple. Download a wallet, try sending a few transactions, and just compare that to your experience with Bitcoin, Litecoin, and other things, just to try it for yourself. But if you would like to find out more about our community, if you go to digibyte.io, there's links there to our official Telegram channel, developer channel. We offer developer bounties from some things. Like right now we're working on updating and releasing our Android iOS wallet. We would like to get more people involved with the core protocol. As I said, we'll be doing a hard fork this coming summer. And we would love people to get involved with that. You know, a great chance to learn and kind of get on the ground in terms of you know, being involved with the blockchain. So I know some people just came in. I was just about to kind of wrap up and go to the next spot here, but I think you're gonna put the video on YouTube, right?
Yeah, the video's gonna be uploaded to the cloud account on YouTube.
But what I wanted to do with kind of the second part of this is, it seems like we have a mix of newer people and people a little bit more familiar. I kind of wanted to open it up to see what questions you guys had. You know, part of this, obviously wanted to introduce people to DigiByte, but I also wanted to kind of offer the experience I've had the past 6 years consulting Fortune 500 companies, advising startups, building and helping improve multiple blockchains, just to kind of see if there's any questions I could answer on a technical level, as well as you know, just kind of like, you know, on a business level too. So any questions anybody has? Yeah.
I have a couple questions. Wondering, first, I just kind of want to know a little more about the cybersecurity element, and that's just kind of what I'm wondering. And also, you mentioned how Merkle said that there wasn't a great way to issue, you know, keys. I'm just wondering how you can comment on secret sharing, like the Digging Helmet.
Right. Okay. So. You know, for those that just walked in, I just gave an introduction of DigiByte, and I also made the point that I believe the biggest killer app and use case for blockchain technology will be in the cybersecurity field. You know, I believe applied blockchain technology can fix 90–95% of the issues we see in the internet today. Now, one of the things that is really underappreciated about a UTXO blockchain like Bitcoin or DigiByte is the fact that it's just not one element of cryptography that's used. One day I decided that I was going to go through and I was going to basically manually calculate all the way everything from the issuance of a public-private key all the way through basically sending a transaction by hand. And about a day and a half in, I just gave up, because there's literally about 15 to 20 different ways that cryptography is interwoven and interworked into a UTXO blockchain. So you have the actual addresses, right? Then you have the transaction inputs and outputs, the ECDSA signatures and the validation. Then you have the actual mining proof of work piece. Then you have the verification of the blocks as they're stored. So there's multiple different aspects there. So going back to your question about the key distribution, the blockchain itself, by having a standard methodology and protocol and the blocks themselves, right? The blocks are issued every so often, they're added to the blockchain. That is the distribution mechanism for how the keys are shared. So if you give me an address that was created, you know, say when DigiByte began in 2014, that address is still valid and can still be identified on the blockchain 5 years later, right? And then there's a history there too. If you know, there's been, but you don't necessarily have to use those keys to make a transaction. So once you have that, you guys remember when Craig Wright came out and said he was Satoshi? The guy who claimed to be Satoshi, and everybody was basically like, okay, if you're Satoshi, use the keys from the Genesis block to sign a message and prove it was you. And when that happened, Charlie Lee came out, he used the Genesis block, and he signed and said, I, Charlie Lee, created Litecoin. I did the same thing with DigiByte. I used the Genesis block. I basically used the private keys from that block, and I said, I, Jared Tate, created DigiByte, right? And anybody can verify that cryptographically, and they can see that. Well, the problem is that is such a beautiful use case for blockchain, but nobody's really using it. The fact that you can validate and sign whatever, whether you can, one of the elements and ways we've used it is we prototype something called DigiID, right? And you basically use those private keys to authenticate yourself and log into a website. So this can be used to replace passwords, to replace SMS two-factor. Huge application that, you know, the first prototypes were developed even as far back as 2013, 2014, but nobody is really using it. There's a huge amount of potential for that application in cybersecurity, right? So that can be used even in the web browsers. So what Merkel's point was that you can use these keys without ever having to have identified or met somebody before. Whereas before, in order to share public and private keys, you don't really know if the person at the end is, you know, who you think they are. So I don't know if that answered your question, but right, okay, go ahead.
I was gonna say, like, I don't see this as a thing that's new for Bitcoin or blockchains. Like, this is just a signature, and you're using the keys you have with your coins to identify yourself. I can see a lot of reasons why someone wouldn't want to do that. Like, I don't want to use my identity. I don't want to use my Bitcoin address as my identity for everything. And I also don't want to reuse my keys.
So absolutely, I completely agree with you. And I would never advise you to use the same private keys that you're actually holding your Bitcoins in. The element is you have the ability to generate almost as many addresses as you want, right? And you could potentially generate as many IDs as you want, right? So there are ways to integrate this in applications. For instance, like what we did with DigiSign is they download an app that's basically a DigiByte wallet, but it's not. You can't really send DigiBytes to and from it. But what it does is it gets linked to the DigiByte blockchain, it generates an address and a signature, but it's used to identify the person who's signing specific documents, right? So they're not using it as a wallet per se to actually send and receive coins to, but they are using it as a way to identify that party. Well, you could use that and you could basically take that and identify different IoT devices, right? Because where do most botnets come from? They come from, you know, the fact that 10,000 webcams are using the same root certificate, and you know somebody comes in with and they're able to access that, and they take over instantly 10,000 different devices. Well, if you give every IoT device its own crypto, you can mitigate that problem, and then you can distribute that on a blockchain. So that's kind of one of the other applications. What I mean by that. Yes.
So Jared, thanks for sharing. Sorry, I missed the beginning. I definitely love that application of sort of like blockchain as like a decentralized key management sort of system. So totally in agreement with what you just said. Could you talk a little bit about the implications of doing that under a UTXO model, like you mentioned, as opposed to like a stateful implementation?
So, you know, first of all, I have to say, and at the beginning of my talk, kind of how I made the approach was, you know, I'm not a fan of winner takes all, right? I believe in multiple blockchains. I'm a huge fan of Bitcoin. You know, I'm not trying to get rid of Bitcoin or anything like that. But I did see issues within the Bitcoin system, and that's where DigiByte came about, you know, scalability wise. But I am a big believer in the UTXO model in the fact that it is the most proven long-term blockchain out there, the UTXO model. And as I'm sure a lot of you are aware, with the virtual machine state model, I kind of feel like, trying to solve all the world's problems at once isn't exactly the best and most secure approach. You run into a lot of issues the more things you try and throw at it. So with the UTXO approach, you're very limited in, well, you're not very limited. There's actually a fair amount of advanced things you can do, right? In terms of smart contracts with time lock verify, multi-sig. I think multi-sig is another very underutilized feature in the Bitcoin core protocol, as well as DigiByte, where you can build some rather advanced applications that do a lot of the things that you see advertised on Ethereum. I think the biggest problem and the biggest issue is the lack of easy to use and understand developer tools on top of things like Bitcoin and DigiByte, whereas on Ethereum, it's much easier to roll some of this stuff out. But I do feel like there are, and I know that there's more advanced applications that are being developed right now using some of these features. So, yes?
A couple questions on numbers. Why 5 mining algorithms, thinking more, and about scaling transactions per second? Do you think it's necessary to go orders of magnitude beyond 500?
Right, so how we ended up with 5, there's been a few approaches, 3, 5. Just from experience, if you start going more than 5, things get very burdensome, they get complicated. That's kind of been one of the issues we've had with DigiByte is we have 5 separate mining algorithms, which means you have 5 times the work in setting up mining infrastructure, in terms of explaining it, in terms of settings. I don't know, how many people in here have ever mined Bitcoin or altcoins? Okay, so about half. As I'm sure a lot of you know, it can be a very complicated undertaking. And then you start, trying to mine Drossel or, on top of DigiByte or Scheme, and the potential variations in hardware configuration, it's kind of an art form. But on the flip side, having 5 algorithms, like I said earlier in my talk, gives you a more secure approach in the terms that you're not centralizing everything on one mining algorithm that could then be taken over by basically one company, like what has happened with Bitcoin, with Bitmain. And you also have the ability to maintain the chain and hard fork when you still have 80% and replace one of those algorithms. So we've talked about 7. That's a possibility. But then again, I think, for the time being, 5 has worked great for us. I mean, we've had it in the wild for 4 years now. And we've never had a successful attack. We've had multiple people attempt it, but as earlier I talked about in my talk, you're kind of limited by how fast you can get blocks. So DigiByte has 15-second blocks right now, which is what allows us for more transactions. But anything faster than that, you start coming up against the latency of the worldwide internet. And the fear is, and this is done by research from various places, that if you get past or under, like say you did 7-second blocks, 5-second blocks, 2-second blocks, miners in a specific geolocation would have advantages and would be able to basically propagate their blocks faster than anybody else, so then they would basically take over the blockchain and just keep issuing everything, right? Well, with DigiByte and 5 mining algorithms, if you have 5 algorithms with a minute block time that are being alternated between, that effectively gives you whatever 60 divided by 5 is, right? But you still have a minute to collect all those blocks, so you can actually get faster block times with the multi-algo approach. That's the point, as well as decentralizing the and making it more secure and robust. So.
Wait, how does multiple algorithms give you faster, safer, fast block times?
So.
Is it still a chain?
Yes, absolutely.
So it's one blockchain.
Yes, it's one blockchain. So let me, since I know there's a bunch of new people that came in here, they're probably confused. I'll go back to. I know, let's see here. So just kind of a quick recap for those that came in. DigiByte was launched in January 2014. We've done a series of improvements over the past 4 years. The first one we did is what we call DigiShield, okay, which is a real-time difficulty adjustment, which, as I stated earlier, the biggest flaw in Bitcoin today is the fact that you have a 2-week retarget. And one of the things that happened to blockchains in 2014, like DigiByte, Dogecoin, is you had multi-pools that would jump from coin to coin to coin. For instance, they go from Litecoin to DigiByte to, say Vertcoin or Dogecoin. Well, not Vertcoin because they had a different mining algorithm. But what would happen is you would see a 5 to 10-fold increase in hash rate. So they would mine a bunch of blocks, sometimes hundreds, thousands of blocks in just a few minutes, but then they would leave and your blockchain would freeze, right? So one of the things we developed is a real-time, every algorithm or every block, the difficulty would retarget, and that would help prevent that. And then we implemented that, we helped put it in Dogecoin, and that same technology is now used in Zcash and Bcash. And as I stated earlier, when Bcash forked off of Bitcoin, I was on Twitter and I said, hey, I don't know what everybody's waiting for. It's going to be hours or days before they find blocks, and it'll be weeks before this stabilizes, which was the case. And that's why, to this day, the biggest bug and problem in Bitcoin is the fact that it takes 2 weeks for the difficulty retarget. It needs to be every block. So that led us to look at other solutions to further mitigate that problem, which is where we came up, and there was actually a coin called Myriad Coin who launched with 5 mining algorithms. They proved it could work. We're like, hey, let's take that, modify it, do our own version. So we hard forked in 2014 from 1 to 5. And then we also adopted our real-time difficulty adjustment to the 5 mining algorithms. So what happens is each algorithm can only account for 20% of blocks that are made. So right now the block time is 1 minute and 30 seconds. So every minute and 30 seconds there's a new SHA-256 block. But in the meantime, every 15 seconds on the blockchain itself, there'll be a Quibbit block, a script block, a scheme block, a Grosso block. Well, like what happens if, like, let's say Bitmain takes every ASIC miner they have in the world and throws it at DigiByte to try and 51% attack it and hard fork it? They could never get more than 20% of the blocks because of our, what we call from the modification multi-shield, it weights it. So if all of a sudden you get like 5 or 6 SHA-256 blocks in a row, the algorithm in multi-shield will actually increase the difficulty in SHA outside of what's happening with mining, and basically make it to where it just puts it way out of reach for miners in a real-time basis, to where basically you could take all of the Bitcoin mining power in the world and you could have a few GPU miners across the planet that would basically be on an equal footing and be able to continue mining blocks. So that actually makes it much harder at 51% attack. In fact, some of the analysis that some people have done say in order to 51% attack DigiByte, you'd have to take over 93% of one algorithm as well as 53% or 51% of the other 4. So in terms of security, obviously you can see the improvement there, but in terms of scalability and speed, because each algorithm is taking 1 minute and 30 seconds to gather transactions and input, because essentially mining is kind of like the lottery, you're competing, but you still need to give everybody a fair amount of time to gather those transactions from all over the world, right? And since what research has found, it takes about 15 seconds in theory, and like I said, we're testing this, we may be implementing it in the next year or so, we could get our block times down with a multi-algo approach, potentially, to 2 to 5 seconds. That's kind of the goal.
A multi-algorithm approach doesn't solve the problem that in order to mine a block, you need to know all of the previous blocks. And so if the most recent block was only 15 seconds ago, I've only had 15 seconds to compute and validate and let that block propagate in order for me to find my next block, right?
Right.
What happens if a SHA-256 block and a scheme block come out at the same time?
So depending on which one wins out, I mean, because here's the thing.
It's an orphan race. If 2 blocks of different algorithms come out at the same time, one of them is going to get orphaned.
Right, absolutely, yes, one of them's gonna be orphaned. I mean, in fact, with every blockchain, it's constantly orphaning, right? Like, the chain's constantly splitting, and then one wins out, and then, that's the one that's added. So, part of the reason we did keep it at 15 seconds for the time being is because, until we had data and some tests that could back up faster block times, we didn't want to implement it. So, like I said, that's something we're looking at doing and exploring, and that's kind of why I wanted to come here and share some ideas, some experience that we've had, in the past few years. So, yeah, any more questions? Yes.
Yeah, can you talk more about the smart contract aspect of how
Right.
you could build on the DigiByte blockchain?
Yeah, so, we have multi-signature ability, right? Multi-sig transactions. We have time lock verify. To me, when I hear the term smart contract, it can be a bit misleading, especially to people that are newer to the blockchain technology field. You can build applications utilizing those features that can send and receive, depending on how you architect the app, things on a contract basis. So, so how many people are familiar with OP return? Okay, so what happened back in like 2012, 2013 with Bitcoin is a bunch of people came up with the idea, they're like, hey, let's put other data in the blockchain besides just a simple transactions back and forth, right? So that led to the addition of what's known as the OP return data field. So it's a non-spendable output that's recorded and logged into the blockchain. That field has it allows for 80 bytes of data, right? So there are how many people know what USD Tether is? Tether, Bitfinex Tether? That is actually a entire secondary layer that is built on top of Bitcoin that is put in the OP return field. So when you actually trade Tether, that's being traded on top of Bitcoin. Now, why did that scaling solution never really take off? Why did it never get widely adopted? Well, because the Bitcoin blockchain filled up. So you really couldn't scale that solution. But one of the strengths that we have with DigiByte is you can build apps leveraging OP return and scale it much more so, up to 40 times more so than you can with Bitcoin. So there's a lot of solutions that were tested, that were developed over the 2013, 2014, like Mastercoin, colored coins, a lot of these secondary layers that were using OP return, things like multi-sig, things like time lock verify, that just hit a brick wall because they couldn't get any more data or transactions through on Bitcoin, which is now actually, as many people know, happening with Ethereum. I mean, Vitalik himself just came out, a week ago and said, no one single group's gonna be able to scale on top of Ethereum unless there's work done, right? And so a lot of those existing systems can be ported over, put on top of DigiByte and scaled, more so. So that's how you can build smart contracts and apps on top of DigiByte. Yes?
Could you talk more about your plans to make more of a framework for app or smart contract development with a UTXO model? So I think that's challenging for most developers, let's say.
Yeah, no, I mean, I completely agree. The lack of framework and tools that are easy to use for developers is our biggest problem right now. And that's a problem that we've been working on. One of the ideas that we're working on and we started is something called DigiPad, launch your blockchain app on top of DigiByte. However, that's still in development, right? We've got various things that we're merging together. But also, going back to those that just came in, DigiByte was never an ICO. There is no company behind it, and it's basically been built up completely by volunteer efforts and private donations over the past 4.5 years. So the biggest reason we don't have this framework is we never had a war chest of millions and millions of dollars. In fact, the foundation to this day has $22,000 in it. So I myself have met with dozens of companies, everybody from Western Union to all the big banks, to Hitachi, etc. And what has happened over the last 4 years is in 2014, you would tell people, oh, I'm into Bitcoin, this is cool, you should really check it out. And they're like, oh, you're crazy, you're a scammer, this is a Ponzi scheme, right? Fast forward to 2015, they're like, oh, well, there might be some things here, but it's gotta be on a private chain. We can't have it out there. And then, you know, you have these private consortiums come and they're like, well, okay, private's really not gonna work either because you can't really secure it. Then in 2016, companies would talk to you and they're like, well, we're still not sure, but we're listening. And now 2017, 2018, there's been a dramatic shift in people's attitudes. They're like, oh, blockchain is the future, it's here to stay. So it's been a complete 180. So now that the doors are opening, we're in the process of raising funds to launch things for a framework like DigiByte. And what's happening is there's several applications that are in development right now that are connected to some fairly large players. I can't talk about it because I'm under an NDA. That will be coming out demonstrating how some of these aspects from a cybersecurity perspective of a UTXO blockchain can be implemented in a application that can basically scale almost infinitely. So some of that's going to come out, but we're in the process of raising funds to build some of those tools. But once again, the beauty of the open source world is anybody can jump in and get involved. So is it possible today? Yes, it's absolutely possible to build applications on top of DigiByte. Is it complicated? Is it not easy to understand? Yes, I will be the first to admit that, and that's something we're working to address as a community. So, any other questions? Yes. I think he has one.
Could you tell us how each block size of the 5 different consensus algorithms chosen by the miner? Are there any concern that one block algorithm is chosen more than the others? Then like one is
So yeah, right now every block size is maxed out at a megabyte, right? So in the next hard fork, we'll introduce code where it doubles every 2 years. And so 2 years from now it's 2 megabytes. So what keeps one block from being selected over and over and over again, say SHA-256 blocks, that's where the DigiShield multi-shield comes in. So it's weighted. So every sequential block that's the same algorithm, it automatically increases the difficulty in that block, completely outside of mining. So it's impossible, and we've got 4 years of data on the blockchain itself that you'll never see more than 2 or 3 of the same blocks in a row before it switches. So it's probably one of the most complicated pieces of code that I've ever seen. I actually didn't write it. It took me 2 days just to go through it, and it was like 3 or 4 paragraphs, but that effectively weights the 5 algorithms against each other. And to this day, I still don't know who wrote it. It was a guy who just submitted a pull request, and we tested it and went through it, and it's pretty amazing. So that's the beauty of the open source world. You had a question?
Oh, right. Oh yeah, what's your thought about IOTA?
IOTA. Going back to 2014, if you had an idea for a blockchain, you actually went and prototyped something and built something and then released something that worked that people would download and use, right? And if you didn't, people would completely rip you apart on the forum and nobody would pay attention to what you're doing. And if you look throughout history, it's very deceiving to people, because if you look at CoinMarketCap, obviously people are, the first thing they look at is what's the market cap, Well, it's very misleading, because a lot of those projects don't even have working blockchains, okay? Now, they don't have them today. Does that mean it won't work in the future? Well, we don't know, right? But I do know something about, my experience in business is if all of a sudden you've got a giant war chest, what incentive do you really have to work as hard to come up with something? In terms of IOTA specifically, obviously I've seen plenty of back and forth. I don't know if I really want to say exactly what I think, but I'm not invested. I guess I could put it that way. The other big misleading thing about blockchains in general is I see the term blockchain associated with everything. Oh, it's on the blockchain, it's blockchain. Or this is a blockchain. Well, not all blockchains are the same. And there's nothing more frustrating than going and seeing all this hype around a project and then finding out it's only running on 7 servers ran by the same company, and Neo, okay? It makes no sense. It's a clustered database at that point. But sure, they're marketing it as a blockchain. You take BitShares. bit shares and everything running on top of it, it's running on 12 servers. You know, and then you take something like Bitcoin or Ethereum where it's tens of thousands. I don't know the exact number for DigiByte right now, but I can tell you we've had 210,000 downloads of full nodes since last April. That's a much more decentralized system. So the system, the industry needs like a decentralization index. Because if you're putting in appending data in the hopes of securing it for cybersecurity, you need to know that that underlying blockchain is secure and it's gonna be around. So another trend that I've seen that's changed is this move towards decentralized projects that are community driven, which, you know, like Monero was like that, Dash was like that, DigiByte, Vertcoin, even Dogecoin, you know, there's nothing behind it, it's still here 2 years later, right? Or 4 years later, 5 years later. Now we're moving into these private companies that are behind these projects, behind these supposed decentralized blockchains, or foundations or whatever. Well, what happens when they run out of funding in 2 months, 5 months, 6 months, a year? You know, I've seen hundreds of projects and blockchains go down. If you took a snapshot of CoinMarketCap in 2014 and you looked at the top 50 or 100, 80, 90% of them aren't here today. Same thing with 2015, and I would imagine that's gonna be the case with today. If you took a snapshot today and you looked 2 years into the future, I would bet 70, 80% of the projects on the top 100 won't be around. So, any other questions I can answer? Yes.
So, well, thanks for being here, for starters. I think everybody in the room has a lot of different technical knowledge and much more so than myself. But as I was kind of following how you were working on this and like the scalability issue, I was kind of curious to get into your thoughts on some of the other efforts out there in the space today. So you started in 2014, and then people starting like distributed proof of stake or Hashgraph and things like that. So as you look at what's happening in 2018, what projects do you see are interesting, not from an investment standpoint, but just more in terms of the technology, scalability, and
Technical standpoint.
Yeah.
You know, from the beginning, I haven't been a big fan of proof of stake, just because in my mind, it's like if blockchain's gonna be here, it needs to be the most secure thing possible. And in my mind, proof of work has been that. And then, you know, what we did with multi-algo proof of work, I think is a step over proof of work. But in terms of distributed proof of stake, I've kind of been a fan. The thing that's piqued my interest here recently is a hybrid approach between proof of work and proof of stake. You know, one of the ideas we tossed around is like, what if we swapped one of DigiByte's 5 mining algorithms and said 20% goes to staking? You know, so you can have that incentive model as well as that proof of work model. So that hybrid approach, you know, is an interesting approach. Distributed proof of stake, I'm personally still not sold on. You know, I also wasn't sold on what Dash was doing. You know, when Dash first started their bank system or their masternode system, you know, but hey, I gotta give them credit here, 5 years later, 4 years later, it's working and they've got funding to continue development and keep doing things. So that's interesting. You know, some of the things that I see that are being promised from some of these new startups are basically repurposed and rehashed things that came out 3 or 4 years ago. In some cases, or just slight modifications with a bunch of fancy buzzwords and white paper. So honestly, you know, I'm not saying that there's not an amazing, you know, innovation out there that is just now occurring, because I'm sure there probably is. I mean, there's a lot of very smart, talented people working on projects, which I think is the beauty of this space. But you know, after seeing a lot of projects fail and then some being exploited, some crash, I'm very hesitant to just jump on board with something that's yet to be battle tested, you know, especially for some time. And you know, DigiByte itself, it's also an economic issue, right? Because if we go out now and do something wild and crazy and different with, you know, I think our market cap's $200 million right now, and we mess something up, you know, that's a huge problem. And then you start talking about blockchains that are in the billions that exist, that, you know, have funds stored on it. Unless you are 100% sure you're not going to do something, you know, you could end up with a lot of angry investors on your hands. So the beauty of having new, fresh ideas coming out is that you're free to explore. You know, in 2014, 2015, I think our market cap was like $80,000. So, you know, we could do a lot of experimentation, do a lot of different things, do a lot of innovation to see how it would work. And I think that's one of the problems of some of these startups going out and raising $1 billion without a working product. That's a lot of pressure. You know, and looking back over the last 4 or 5 years, we made mistakes that we had to roll out fixes for. But nobody ever noticed them because it wasn't as big of a deal. So we had more time to build a more stable, secure system and to test it. So that's gonna be a huge issue for a lot of new startups. There's just a lot of pressure. So, but yeah, the hybrid approach, combining proof of work, proof of stake, which is ideal in you know, I've often thought, what if you had 5 mining algorithms, and then you had 2, you know, proof of stake systems that merged in for 7. You know, you split the block reward 7 ways. That would be an interesting model. But obviously it gets more complex the more you add in there, right? So, especially when you go to explain that to investors, that can be confusing. But yeah, any more questions? Yeah.
3 questions, but they're all really easy.
Okay.
So one is, how many entities do you estimate own 50% of the mining power on DigiByte?
You mean of each individual algorithm?
Collectively.
Okay, so when
Well,
we,
actually, I guess both.
yeah, so when we went to do the SegWit activation in April of last year, you know, the community, it took us almost 2 months to track down mining pools. There was mining pools we didn't even know were mining DigiByte, and it was almost a couple hundred separate mining pools, which was pretty crazy. I had no idea. I thought maybe it was like 20. Yeah, it was a couple hundred different mining pools, and if you go out from there, I don't know how many individual miners were at each one of those or what the average was, but at this time, you know, I don't know if I could even make a fair estimation, you know, with what that is. You know, could there be 1 or 2? I don't know, but I doubt it. You know, just in the fact of just from what I've seen, you know, over the last 4 years. I mean, that's a good question.
Confidence that a company like Bitmain or Elon would go and make an ASIC or Russell Speed and keep it and are mining on it in secret.
I think we would see it. You know, we have a pretty active mining community, and that's usually kind of the first indication. People are like, oh, this, you know.
Well, you just said that you had to go and track down like 100 different groups. Would you notice if 80% of the hash rate was one group that was just mining really efficiently? So I don't think that would be visible.
Well, so what we've tried to do with our Block Explorer, DigiExplorer, so what, and this is the same with Bitcoin, is usually a lot of mining pools, and this isn't always the case, will identify their pool in the Coinbase transaction.
Right.
And that's kind of how you can identify, and that's why if you go to DigiExplorer, it'll show which pool mined it. And it's been fairly consistent, so you'll see a lot of the top dozen pools, you know, coming up fairly often, and then you can go and you can see there's a wide variety of miners on there. If all of a sudden, like let's say it just stopped and it's just blank.
Yeah, but what these secret miners, these secret ASIC companies do, and I've worked with a couple at this point, is that they will sign up their ASICs. You know, they'll put one ASIC on this pool.
Oh, they'll split it out, yeah. Yeah.
And so there's no, because they know if you discover them, you're gonna fork.
Right.
And validate their hardware. So they do a good job of staying hidden. And I would argue that really there aren't many, like, it's not hard to hide secret ASICs, because they don't, you know, they leave the same footprint as GPUs do. It's just instead of consuming, you know, 500 watts, they consume half a watt to do the same work.
Right. Yeah, no, I mean, I completely agree. It's definitely possible. But like I said, we are planning on hard forking out 2 of the algorithms here in the next 6 months, the next 3 to 6 months. And we're basically trying to replace those with the most ASIC resistant mining algorithms possible. So I've heard various reports that there have been ASICs developed specifically even for DigiByte. And I'm not, you know, saying that's not happening, because in reality it probably is. And it probably is happening in secret. But I do know that I'm, you know, active in our mining community, and I do have people saying, hey, I'm still mining with GPUs on my desktop. So one of the things we've tried to do is make like easy miners, so you can download and get started mining. But at the flip side, you know, we wanted to make sure that there are a couple algorithms that are ASIC mineable, right? Because first of all, there's a huge market for used ASICs coming from Bitcoin. And if they can be repurposed, you know, on DigiByte, which they have been, you know, it's usable. So, yeah, that's kind of been our approach to it. Any more questions?
We have time for one last question.
Oh, I went first.
Go ahead.
You mentioned ECDSA, previously at one point, where you read anything. Any love for Schnorr signatures in the next work?
Yeah, we're definitely looking at that. I mean, I think that's pretty well been battle tested and proven now.
Sorry, what was the last?
Z-Stars.
No, Schnorr.
Oh, Schnorr signatures, yeah. Yes. Schnorr signatures, yes, that is something we're looking at, for sure. Yeah, and I was thinking zero knowledge proof, yeah.
I mean, that'd be great too.
Yeah. Zero knowledge proof is what I meant, is I think been battle tested. Schnorr signatures, on the other hand, yeah, I mean, it's definitely something we're looking at, so.
Cool.
And the other thing we're looking at is actually swapping, you know, potentially upgrading SHA 256 to maybe SHA 512, right? In terms of validation, or the encryption algorithm used behind it. And it had more to do with the NSA memorandum that came out that said everything should be bumped to 512. So is there secret quantum computers out there operating right now? I don't know, that's the question. To me, you know, the last DigiByte's mined in 2035, I'm positive we're gonna have to change almost everything internally within DigiByte and Bitcoin by that point.
Wasn't the suggestion to bump to 512/256?
I would have to go back and look at it, but I thought it was just SHA 512.
I think it's just double key sizes.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, just 512, I thought.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.